Hey, good morning and good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the continuing series of UnleashWD webinars. At UnleashWD, we are committed to bringing critical thinking from unconventional resources to distributors and their channel partners. Today, I'm real excited because we focus on a topic that I think is very, very important. The topic of taking the first steps of innovation, beginning your innovation journey. I believe this topic is very, very timely. We are in the early stages of reviewing results from a survey that we're conducting for the industry. And as we research the state of the industry, we're finding that distributors are telling us a number of different things. Number one, they're telling us that we must reinvent our businesses before someone else does. Distributors are saying we must reinvent our business before someone else does. That someone else might be the large national distributors like Grainger or Motion, and even, as we all know, the Amazons and the Googles of the world today. Number two, they're telling us that in this age of disruption, that we do live in the age of disruption, that with the new technologies, big shifts in the economy, big shifts in the workforce and others, that they're changing the game for our businesses. Number three, distributors are telling us that most distributors are using outdated business models and that we need to do a better job of listening to the voice of the customer and to find new ways of creating, delivering, and capturing value. They're also telling us that the pace of change is too slow in most of our businesses, that the pace of change outside of our businesses is faster than the pace of change on the inside. Let me give you just a few examples. Here are the sales of one distributor who we're currently working with, who sells traditionally to the brick and mortar dealers. Now, what they have found over the last 5 years is that e-commerce, selling to their e-commerce customers, this market didn't exist for them 5 years ago and now represents 26% of their business. Now, while the business is changing, think about what their sales management team is doing. Their sales management team is holding on to the legacy structure rather than trying to transform the business to take advantage of this e-commerce opportunity. The change that's going on in this business, for example, they've identified 100 customers that represent $112 million in e-commerce revenue, but the company has only assigned a base of $30 million to the e-commerce team. There is a need to transform that organization. There is a need to innovate. There is a need to solve new problems in new ways. Here's another example. Recently, I'm sitting in the boardroom with the CEO and his direct reports as they're beginning their planning cycle for 2014. When the topic of innovation came up, the question that was raised, I think it's a great question. The question that was raised was, well, what does innovation time look like? And we talked about it. The consensus around that table was that you really couldn't plan for innovation time. In fact, one VP, and by the way, I don't agree with him, one VP said, you just don't come to your desk and now say, well, I'm going to start innovating now. Innovation to them is a mystery. The key is, and that's why we're here today, it doesn't have to be. One last example. Again, very recently, I'm with still another group, another distributor who's looking to innovate and reinvent their business model. As we facilitated this 3-day offsite business model workshop, I got to tell you guys, it was a lot of hard but fun work. 3 nights working from 7 in the morning till 10 at night. But I want to tell you about, before that hard work started, the general manager kicked off the session, and her marching orders were very direct. She looked at her team and she reminded the group, you see the quote on the screen, that we have to stop this vicious cycle, she said. She said, we are not differentiated. And she repeated, we have to stop this vicious cycle. And then she looked at her team and she said, if not us, who? And that's what today is all about. And I'm so pleased that you're joining us. We know we must change. We know we're living in the age of disruption. We know that we must get better faster. We know, in a word, that we must innovate. And if not us, who? So to help us define where to get started, what innovation time looks like, and what are those first steps of the innovation journey, I'm excited to introduce today's panelists. First, I'm Dirk Beveridge, president of UnleashWD and the founder of the only innovation summit for wholesale distributors and distributors, which is taking place on October 29th and 30th this year in Chicago. One of our sponsors is Innovaro, and we've got two phenomenal individuals from Innovaro with us today. Chris Carbone and Julie Honke are both from Innovaro, and I guarantee you, you're going to be hearing a lot more about Innovaro in the weeks, months, and years to come. Innovaro is the leading provider of software-driven innovation solutions. Their proven technology, by the way, I've got my hands on the technology. We're using their technology to do some of the things that you're going to hear Chris and Julie talk about in our research for the distribution industry. But their proven technology, their proven methodology was developed by Gary Hamel, whom the Wall Street Journal has ranked as one of the top 4 most influential business thinkers in the world. I can't think of a better organization than Innovaro and Chris and Julie to help us define what innovation time looks like. So Chris and Julie, thank you both for being here, guys.
Hey, my pleasure, Dirk. Thank you.
Yep.
Yeah, you're well, really excited here, guys. So let's the question, where and how do we start this innovation journey within our companies? Chris and Julie, it's one of the key questions that I hear. We're talking about innovation, but where do we start? So to start this conversation, let's go to you, Chris, if you don't mind. And for those of you that are with us, Chris Carbone is a director at Innovaro. And I think more importantly, which I think is very cool, Chris, you are a professional futurist, aren't you?
That's correct. Yep.
I think that's hot, man. Boy, back in college, Chris, I read The Third Wave by Alvin Toffler, and that's the first time
Right.
that I heard about a futurist. And I just think what you do is great stuff. And I think being able to peer into the future, I don't even know if I'm saying it right, but being able to look at the trends and have that foresight in the future is something that's very, very important to all businesses, distributors, especially, if you will. And I know that as a futurist, you love helping clients make sense of emerging trends and consumer behaviors to identify innovation opportunities. So I think this is a great first step in the innovation process. So Chris, thanks for joining us, and love to hear your insights as to where you think distributors and we in our businesses might start that innovation process and innovation journey.
Awesome. Great. Thanks, Dirk. Yeah, let's talk a little bit about this idea of charting your course with trends and foresight. So at Innovaro, I oversee the Trend and Foresight Research Group. And as you said, really what we do is we help organizations identify and understand. That's the really important one. Identifying is important, but understanding sort of important social and technological trends and the way they're influencing the future, right? And the reason we do that is because we want people to make better decisions today, right? So the work I do at Innovaro is really aimed at that very front end of the innovation process, and understanding the big forces, like you said, new technologies, shifts in the economy, shifts in the workforce, how these are going to change the business environment in the future, right? So again, yeah, some people call us futurists, we're trend analysts, foresight consultants, lots of different terms to use. But in the end, the real goal is to help people be proactive in trying to decode the future rather than sort of just feeling like you're riding along with the tide and getting tossed around.
Love it. Hey,
So
Chris.
we do this in a couple ways. We conduct a bunch of different types of research and studies. We do trend identification studies because if you're going to chart the course, you have to sort of get a sense of the lay of the land. You have to have a common understanding of the trends as a business that are impacting you. We do future of studies, so we look at the future of an industry. We look at the future of different product categories. We've done some stuff recently on the future of gum. We've done something on the future of pet care to sort of jumpstart the innovation thinking for a global pet care company. We also do scenario planning. Some people may be familiar with that methodology. It's sort of one of the most prominent in the foresight field. Sort of one of the famous examples is Royal Dutch Shell used scenario planning to anticipate and weather the 1974 oil embargo and come out of that whole experience a lot stronger than its competition. So scenarios are an important part of what we do. And we also have some subscription research services that we do that help people sort of keep their ear to the ground and understand trends as they're evolving. A couple things I want to mention. We work primarily for larger firms, kind of like the Intels, Johnson Controls, General Motors. We work for Hershey Company. So we do span B2B and B2C world. And like everyone on this call, these companies recognize that you have to innovate if you're going to stay relevant. And so they have folks who are dedicating time and attention to foresight, thinking 3, 5, 10 years out even. Sometimes that's a small team, sometimes it's a big team. But this is the challenge we have, is to look ahead.
Yep.
A couple basic things I want to put on the table here before, sort of what is foresight? One of the misperceptions, I think, is that foresight is about prediction.
You don't make predictions, Chris? Sorry, as a futurist, I'm sorry. As a futurist, you don't make predictions?
We talk about what the future is going to look like, but we don't think that there is any single point future that we can say this is the way it's going to happen, because really what we want to do is enable people to create the future that they want and to understand that the future could evolve in many different ways, and we need to be ready no matter how it evolves. Okay, so there's no predetermined future we're sort of pointing towards. But what I like to think of is sort of like this image on the screen here, a radar operator. What we're really trying to do is help people see the early warnings, see the weak signals, and understand what these early indicators might tell us about the future. There's a pretty well-known quote in the foresight field from a science fiction author, actually William Gibson, that says, "The future is already here, it's just not evenly distributed," right? So that's kind of what we're thinking. We see little bits and pieces of the future out there. We try to cobble that together, help people get a clearer picture of what that's like. Okay, let's take a sort of a silly example to illustrate that. Online dating. Right? Online dating's been around since the mid-90s, but not really a common thing. The latest research, though, shows us that as of 2013, about 35% of Americans who were married in the last 5 or 6 years met online. Right? The future was already here in the mid-90s when this started, but the future wasn't evenly distributed. Now this is a $4 billion global industry. Okay, so kind of an oddball example, but it sort of illustrates that point. We know the future's out there. We can see early signals. Let's make it clearer and use it to our advantage. So we do get some anticipatory capabilities from foresight.
Sure, makes a lot of sense, Chris.
So I guess the next question then is, if you're interested in innovation, why does this matter? Why does foresight matter? I think the first and foremost point there is that both innovation and foresight, they're really tied together because at their core, they're both about change, right? We all understand as an industry, as business folks, that we need to innovate to survive and actually thrive in the future. And that means we're going to have to do things differently than today, right? We know change is coming, and in much the same way, the field of strategic foresight, which is what I practice, it's premised on that same idea. Change is coming, and we need to decode it. So this is this really close tie between foresight and innovation. And any good foresight or innovation methodology is going to have foresight built into it. We inject at Innovaro our trend and foresight perspective right from the start. It's sort of baked into our methodology, if you will. Julie's going to talk a little bit about that later, the sort of trends and discontinuities lens that we called it, and the customer or consumer insight lens. Those help us get that foresight perspective right away in our innovation process.
Love it.
So it's akin to that old saying, insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result. It's also probably a pretty good definition for a bad innovation practice. And so we want to develop mechanisms that help push our thinking in new directions so we get past what's pretty much a common, human tendency to try to solve new problems in the same old way. So Foresight gives us a way to do this in our innovation practice.
Chris, if you don't mind, the definition of insanity is right on. And then you said something that made a lot, that I made a note on that said, I think you said change is coming and we need to decode it, and you got me thinking there. And, no matter what business we go to, everybody acknowledges that, we need to change and that change is coming. But when you really ask them to articulate what changes are taking place, what do they foresee? Oh, I think we can talk about it at a high level, but then to really drill down and to understand how that's going to impact potentially our business model, how we serve markets. I'm not sure if the thinking goes to that level in most organizations. Would you agree with that? Would you agree with that premise or disagree with me?
No, I would agree with that. And actually, that's another key role for a futurist is, again, not to say what is the future going to be, but to get business people to lay out their assumptions about today and about the future. You got to lay out your assumptions about this situation and about where you think it's headed before you can actually move forward. And so, yeah, laying those assumptions bare and naked is a big part of what we try to do.
Now you're talking my language, bud.
Okay, so a second real connection between foresight and innovation is speed of change. Dirk, you mentioned that before. A term we like to use to sort of describe this is that we're living in a VUCA world, VUCA, volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity, right? That's a term borrowed from the military that they were using to describe sort of the geopolitical environment. Clearly, it applies to the business environment as well.
You bet.
So we all feel this, whether we put it in those terms or not exactly. But new technologies, economic uncertainty continues. 5-6 years after the financial crisis. Big shifts in economic power, big shifts in consumer power with the rise of 2.5 billion consumers in China and India. So all these forces making the world feel a lot more complex and uncertain. And it's not only that it feels that way, but it actually, some of the data shows us that it is. We have here a chart showing the lifespan, average lifespan of a company, the time they spend on the S&P 500 list.
Yep.
1960, pretty stable. You could be there about 60 years, expect to be there 60 years. 1980s, pace is picking up a little bit. 40 years was the average lifespan for a firm on the S&P 500. Today, 18 years. Okay, so what's happening here? We're seeing, big old line companies getting bumped by Google, Amazon, Netflix, all these firms that have ridden the wave of the internet, of cloud computing, of e-commerce, of data-driven business models, right? So, getting back to the idea of the link between foresight and innovation, what foresight tries to do is help reduce some of this uncertainty, some of this upheaval, right? It's not going to erase it. Foresight is not going to eliminate uncertainty or risk, but it gives us some tools, again, to be proactive about trying to understand them.
Chris, as I take a look at your thoughts on VUCA and volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity, and then when I take a look at, this lifespan, the average lifespan on the S&P 500, I think of a conversation I had just yesterday with the CEO of a distributor, and he talked to me about what he sees as the 3 stages that many businesses go through. The first generation of the business, and is the entrepreneur, and as he said, that's the individual who sees an opportunity and goes all in, takes all of his chips and puts it in, and begins to build a business. Over time, he or she needs to retire and hands it over to the second generation. And then that second generation, this was his perspective, is that typically the second generation in this industry might manage that business to provide a certain lifestyle for themselves. And then we're getting to some of these third generation businesses, and his perspective was that the third generation then has to come in and fix the business, because the second generation might have been, again, generally speaking, might have been managing it for a lifestyle. And I'm thinking about that conversation I had just yesterday. And then I'm thinking about VUCA, volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity. And here we are, where some individuals in this industry of distribution are in a position where they have to, quote unquote, fix the business from this individual. And I think what you're saying is that job has just become that much more difficult in this world of VUCA.
Yeah, and I think the other thing is that, we have now a world where, everyone can compete against everyone else. Okay, so one of the terms that we hear a lot being thrown around more is the idea of a micro multinational. We have, through technology, the ability to have a small company. Maybe it's 3 people, maybe it's 23, maybe it's 123, but they're competing on a global stage and on a global scale. And so, technology is giving us really interesting ways to compete in new ways and sort of, obviously leveling the playing field. So that throw that in the mix with this 3-generational model, and you've got even a more complex world.
Without question, man. Interesting. Thank you.
Good. So one final sort of reason or idea that we like to put out for connecting foresight and innovation is that when you use them in tandem, when you use foresight and innovation in tandem, you can really work towards innovating with the right targets in mind. Okay, foresight gives us the ability to identify new and emerging needs, consumer needs or customer needs in a B2B case, and so in some ways what we think about is the idea of foresight helping us future-proof our innovation efforts, right? So we don't want to be innovating towards yesterday's customer needs, but instead we want to try to harness the anticipatory capacity of foresight, and we want to turn volatility and change from a threat into an opportunity, right? Yep. It becomes a real ingredient. This understanding of change and this forward-looking view, it becomes an ingredient in our innovation process. Okay, so just a real quick example of that, something to think about: Netflix, right? Netflix was conceived, when it was conceived, pretty much people had an easy way to view videos at home. It was called Blockbuster, right? But the people who started Netflix saw the opportunity. They identified the pain points, right? Returning movies, showing up, finding the movie you wanted wasn't there. They also understood the changing tech landscape. Streaming technology was improving. Internet-ready TVs were going to be released a few years down the road. So what they did is they had foresight. They were able to identify how social trends, consumer behaviors were changing, and how tech trends were changing, and how those things would collide to create a real new disruptive business model. The rest is really history on that one.
Yeah.
The thing that I think is interesting is when you look at how much Netflix takes up in terms of bandwidth in the U.S. now. 30% of bandwidth downloaded towards the home on any given night in the U.S. now is dedicated to people viewing Netflix.
I had no idea.
Right? So, yeah, it's 30% of U.S. internet traffic headed towards the home. So, I mean, talk about disruption and a real change, sea change in the world of media. So, but the thing to take away from that is, we can't all be visionaries like Netflix or Steve Jobs or any of the other folks that you hear about. But again, like I said at the outset, there are these weak signals out there, and foresight gives us a way, even if we're not visionaries, to have tools and to make sense of these signals and to use them sort of as guideposts as we do chart out our course and start on some innovation journeys.
You bet, Chris. This is great stuff, man. You've got my mind thinking. I'm even going to go right back to, the foresight that you talk about allows us. I think you said very early on, allows us to be proactive, right? And
yep.
And when I think of the Netflix story that you just shared with us, and you said, we all don't have to be Reed Hastings of Netflix and Steve Jobs of the world, but the fact is, Blockbuster, right? They could have seen those same signals as Reed Hastings at Netflix did, but they decided for one reason or another not to act, right? And they were stuck in their legacy business, and then they reacted, right, to try to get online too late. And we all, as you said, we all know that story. It brings me to an article from Industrial Distribution just yesterday, where Jack Kehoe wrote an article that talked about the future of the independent distributor and the challenge that independent distributors are having. And in the comments sections, he and I are chatting back and forth. And just this morning, he talked about the challenge that many independent distributors have had historically is that they've been reactive. And he says, while they have changed and innovated in some ways, like integrated supply and system contracts and the like, his premise is that, and I believe it, his premise is that all of these forms of innovation have really been driven by the customer rather than the distributor themselves. And if I'm hearing you right, if we really commit ourselves to developing some form of a system to understand, to begin identifying and understanding these trends and really putting some mental rigor behind it, it's going to put us in that position to truly look at the market, look and be proactive, utilizing your words, right, in terms of finding new ways to bring value to the marketplace. Am I understanding you correctly?
Yeah, that's exactly right. It's, Netflix did a great job, and I think we could all take a lesson from that of leading our customers toward the future. Apple has been key in doing that kind of stuff. All these companies that have been really have put innovation at their center are about leading their customer toward the future.
You bet. Chris, man, I appreciate it. Great insight, a great way to get started. What I'm taking from you, at the high level is our first steps of innovation is we've got to commit to embedding and institutionalizing into our businesses in one way or another to continue to identify and understand these signals and these trends and these shifts that are going by and go through that mental rigor to say how could they be impacting our business 3, 5, 10 years down the road. And that can be the foundation, should be the foundation of some of our innovation efforts. So I know you're going to stick around, and we might have some questions towards the end, Chris. But thank you so very much, man. Great stuff.
Very good.
Yeah. So let's move to Julie Honke, if you don't mind. And now that we know where and how to look for trends, let's focus on what we do once we have begun to identify some of those trends. To help us here, again, we'll call on Julie Honke, who is an innovation strategist at Innovaro. Julie, almost as cool as being a futurist, all right? But an innovation strategist, man, is very
I'm cool.
Yeah, I know you are. That's why I love hanging with you. Are you kidding me? Other than her cool factor, what I love about Julie is that she has this ability, everybody, to tap over 30 years of experience in technology, in finance, in management, and in marketing to help businesses and to help distributors begin their innovation journey. And when called for, she, as this strategist of strategists, if you will, when called upon, she can help develop and shape bold new business models. Julie, I am thrilled that you are here as well, and I'm going to turn it over to you. Thanks for being here.
Hey, thank you, Dirk. I'm just sorry my mother's out of the country. She would have loved to have heard that.
We'll send her a recording, Julie.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
A lot of companies have attempted to innovate and have struggled with it, and some have walked away jaded, saying innovation is over-touted. It's just a buzzword. It's all hype. Yeah. But it's really so much more valuable than that because, as Chris was saying earlier, to innovate is to adapt. And in today's volatile markets, to adapt is to survive. So innovation is hard, and as in anything new, the first steps are always the most difficult. But in understanding how to step and where not to step, it's useful to understand why it is so difficult. So organizations aren't designed for innovation at all. Ongoing operations are always and inevitably in conflict with innovation projects. Yeah. And that's because the way we run our businesses, the things that have made us successful, is this ongoing effort to hone and fine-tune the predictable and the repeatable. And innovation initiatives are anything but that. They're non-routine because we're forging into new territory, and they're uncertain. So to compare ongoing operations to innovation initiatives, it's kind of like comparing apples to high-end sports cars.
Is that a Tesla?
Yeah, it is.
Is that in your garage?
Yeah, no, not yet.
All right.
Not yet. But it's important to understand that the things that made you successful as a business are going to be highly toxic to an innovation initiative or an innovation journey. So, what got you here won't get you there.
Yeah, good point.
It is hard, but it can be learned. And no one is born knowing how to innovate. It's a learning process.
Yeah.
And I love the analogy here of crawling before we walk, because if you've ever watched a young child who's just about to take their first steps, man, they work so hard at it. They really want it. They fall on their butt a lot. They fall in worse places than that, but they keep getting up and they keep trying again and again. And that very tenacity is what we need with innovation efforts, because there is failure and things don't always work. Again, it's new territory.
You bet.
I think back to the 70s, when U.S. auto manufacturers were looking at these Japanese cars saying, how can they make such superior cars at a competitive price? And so they went to Japan and they looked at the quality initiatives there, and they took away some superficial lessons that didn't really work when they brought them back. But we got there. It was hard initially, but now TQM, Total Quality Management, Six Sigma improvements, these are all pretty well ingrained and embedded in so many of our businesses today. And I think that's where we are with innovation. We're just taking our first steps, but it can be done and we can ingrain it. So once you've completed that first innovation journey, you now have an in-house team that's got the experience working with the tools and learning the processes. And with practice and with repeated journeys, that's how they develop the expertise and skills that will lead towards an embedded culture of innovation.
So, Julie, can I? So, I'm not sure I've thought about it in this. Am I hearing you say innovation requires practice?
Yeah, anything you do requires practice if you want to get better at it.
Yeah, I guess that's right. But help me understand. I mean, I've never put the two things together. So, from your experiences, how does a company, a distributor that might be $50 million or $100 million in revenues, or $500 million, $1 billion, when you say that we need to practice at innovation in our businesses, can you just drive that home for me? What do you mean by that?
Well, sure. We've been working with companies for 17 years, taking them on innovation journeys.
Yeah.
And that's, it's a project. You want to innovate something? Well, let's go on a journey.
Yeah.
And we've developed a methodology of what works and what doesn't. And it really is a practice in terms of how you ask questions. I mean, this is part of what I'm going to talk about.
Okay. Yep.
Today is these first steps and how the methodology makes it something that can be repeated. It's not serendipity. It's not lightning striking. It's much more science. We form hypotheses and we test them. Yeah. And like absolutely anything in life, you get better with practice.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so with this practice, we can move towards the actual embedding of a culture within our business. And the leading businesses, if we think of innovation today, the top names that come to mind are 3M and Whirlpool and Apple and Google. These companies, if you talk to their employees, every employee sees themselves as innovators. And there is a culture that's been ingrained where they're all looking for new ideas and how can we improve our customers' experience. And that's what we want to move towards.
You bet.
Yeah, okay, so we're ready to go. Now we need to pack our corporate backpack. What are we going to take with us on this journey? And we're going to need new processes. We have to look at the problems through a different lens, from a different perspective. We're certainly going to need training and tools because it is uncharted territory. And we're going to need metrics so we can measure our success. And the metrics are specifically to help us with the testing of these hypotheses. As I say, this is more science than serendipity. Yep. So we're going to form hypotheses. We think this is a good idea. but it's based on these assumptions. And then we're going to test, either prove or disprove those hypotheses. And if they're wrong and we fail, we revise them and we learn from it. And then we rinse and repeat over and over and over again. And so, we need ways to measure that.
Can't I just innovate once and and allow my business to thrive?
Well, sure, but how long will it thrive?
Right.
I mean,
right.
Sooner or later, something else is going to creep up and disrupt you. So there are a lot of companies that have been very innovative that stopped innovating. Nokia is one that comes to mind.
Well said.
Yeah, and so, yeah, you can do it once, but I think we really do want to move towards future-proofing ourselves with an innovative culture that can more nimbly respond to changes in our markets.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to say values and rewards are important because our corporate values need to shift, and how we reward our employees. And fear, I think, is the biggest concern here. We have a culture in most businesses of a fear of failure. We punish it when you fail, we punish you, and we don't reward you for taking chances and trying things. And in an innovative environment, you've got to continually test, fail, and learn. And that's where you learn. You learn from the mistakes. Lara Lee was one of your speakers last year, your storytellers at UnleashWD.
Yeah.
And I love her talk. I think it was entitled Leaning into Fear.
It was.
Yeah, and what she said that really resonated with me was we have to replace our fear of failure with a fear of failing to learn. And I just thought that was brilliant.
Say that again, would you?
We have to replace our fear of failure with a fear of failing to learn.
You bet.
And if we fear failing to learn, we will embrace trying new things. As long as you learn from them, it's okay. And that's where the expression fail early and cheaply comes from. We're testing things. And don't you want to find out if an assumption is wrong early in the process, where it's relatively cheap and easy to fix, rather than way downstream when it's prohibitively expensive?
Darn right.
Yeah, so finally, the last thing we have to make sure we allocate is time. You can't do innovation casually. Again, if we think about these top innovative firms, Google, 3M, and Whirlpool, they all give every employee between 10 and 20% time to innovate, work on innovation projects. That's half a day to a full day a week away from everything else they're doing to focus on an innovation initiative.
Julie, I was just on the phone yesterday or the day before with an organization whose executive management team has assembled a project team to reevaluate business models for 2 different market segments that they've identified. And one of the things I learned yesterday was that the executive management team has set the goal for this project team to innovate and to uncover a new business model, again, for these 2 market segments. But they have not provided any additional resources and have not provided any additional any additional time, to your last point there. Everybody still has the same job to do, which we all know we're all stretched, but they're asking them to do this on top. In your 17 years of working with companies, how if you were a betting woman, okay, how much do they have? What's their odds of success in your opinion?
I think they're setting up their team for failure, and unless they've got a very different way of compensating and rewarding that team, those poor guys will never want to innovate again. And that's what happens. It reinforces the bad lessons. It does take time, and if you don't have it, and that's one of the ways we measure, projects, journeys with customers we're working with, is we look at the amount of time they're putting in and how far they're progressing, and we'll step back in and say, guys, this isn't going to work unless you make more of a commitment. You're on a recipe for disaster here.
Love it. Thank you.
So you can't undervalue the time. And since you brought up team, who are you going to travel with on this journey? What's your team going to look like?
Yeah.
Habits are a very powerful influencer of how we think and how we act. They're kind of hardwired in our brains. And one of the strongest habits we tend to have as individuals and companies is we like to surround ourselves with people who look and think like we do. And this is highly toxic to an innovation effort because You need those different perspectives. You need diversity. We need purple penguins. Yeah, and you never know where that different perspective will take you. We ideally like to mix up our different innovation teams so that they've got millennials and younger people on with the old guard, that we've got line managers working together with executives and the custodial staff. Anybody is welcome. Come in from other industries. Come in, get a professional sports player on your team and a violinist and a Buddhist monk, and you can borrow ideas from everywhere. IBM under Tom Watson Jr. had a saying. There was a nickname for IBM's outside thinkers, and they were the wild ducks. And Watson liked to quote Kierkegaard, who had said, you can always tame a wild duck, but you can never make a tame duck wild. And if you want those fresh perspectives, you need outside opinions. And it'll move you beyond your comfort zone. People who disagree with you, yeah, you betcha. But it's vital to an innovation effort. Now, Dirk, you see that purple penguin up front?
I do.
He makes me think of you, because you're out there. I should write Dirk right across his belly. You're out there scouring all these other industries, looking for the wild ducks. And when you find them, you bring them back to UnleashWD.
Yeah.
And it's really kind of cool because you get these outside perspectives, and then people start thinking, I might be able to work with that. I might be able to do that.
Yeah.
So you need a purple suit next month.
Well, I tell you what, I think it even looks better than what I'm wearing today. So I think you.
That's why we don't turn on the cameras.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Yeah, this is Chris here. I mean, some groups even relish in that role and really promote it within the organization. One of the groups that we've worked with within the Shell organization, they have a group that is titled the Shell Game Changer Group.
Oh, wow.
That group is dedicated towards different thinking. They're supposed to bring that outside thinking in, and that's set up in their structure.
That's amazing, Chris. And Chris, how is that group accepted by the rest of the individuals in Shell?
Yeah, I mean, I think, originally they may have been looked at like, why did these folks get that special privilege? But now they're really some of the go-to people. I mean, they're looked at as the people that you want to bring into your special project and bring into your team when you're trying to inject that kind of thinking. So they're a real resource and really viewed that way within Shell.
That's interesting. That's interesting. Great stuff. And Julie, it sounds like our penguins have a different way of calling each other right now. That background noise. But let's go to take a look at those 4 lenses of discovery, if you don't mind. All right?
Yeah. This is where we get into our actual methodology. And ours is based on Gary Hamel's work. By the way, he was #1 strategic thinker in the world, not #4.
Yeah. Thanks.
So the methodology is really based on diverge, converge. Okay. First, we're going to break apart how we view things, how we think about our business and our competencies and stuff. We're going to break it apart, and then later we'll converge and bring it back together. So we break it apart by viewing the problem at hand through 4 different lenses, and we'll go through each of them: customer insight, core competencies, orthodoxies, and weak signals.
Yeah.
Okay. So customer insight is more than just customer research. The challenge here is to uncover our customers' unmet needs before they're even visible to the customer themselves. Henry Ford was fond of saying, if I asked my customers what they wanted, they would have asked for a faster horse. And that's often what customer research will uncover. We want something faster, cheaper, or easier. These will lead to incremental improvements, but they're not going to give you innovative breakthroughs. Cirque du Soleil could have asked circus goers, what would you like to see in a circus? We're creating a new circus. And what they would have heard were, we want more clowns. We want bigger elephants or higher trapeze. But Cirque du Soleil wasn't satisfied with that. And so they dug deeply and tried to come up with what unmet needs would delight and captivate their audience in new and untried ways. And I think their results speak for themselves. This requires a deep customer empathy. You really have to crawl inside the skin of the person you're trying to understand and understand their frustrations and desires. But breakthrough innovation comes when you're able to find that intersection of unarticulated needs and unserved markets. That's the gold ring.
Love it.
Yeah. Our second lens is core competencies. And it's easy to think about a core competency as a skill. What are the skills your business have? What are you good at? But it's not about what you do. It's about your unique strengths and what you possess that's rare and valuable. The things that give you competitive differentiation. What doesn't anyone else do in your marketplace? These are your core competencies. I like to view core competencies as a Lego block. Each one is a different Lego block, and you can snap them together. And the more you snap together, the harder it is to replicate what you do and to compete against you. So you create a structure that's stronger and harder to knock over. And core competencies don't just have to be your own internal strengths. You can leverage the competencies of other groups, other businesses, by partnering with them through acquisition, through collaboration, and snapping together their competencies with your own. You can build your Lego masterpiece. Yeah. So our third, and this is an important one. This is another toxic one.
I agree. I agree with that.
Which part?
With orthodoxies, that what you're about to talk about, because I'm thinking. Go ahead. I'm sorry. I interrupted. Yeah.
You've seen it already, Dirk.
Yeah.
Yeah. Orthodoxies are the biases about our business and our industries that limit our thinking. They become ingrained in sort of the corporate knowledge and collective, history of where we've come from, because they're the things that made us successful, right? Yeah. But because of that, we're usually so rooted in them that we're blinded to them. So you have to challenge what you're most sure of. And this is where, more purple penguins, bring in people from outside the company, from outside the industry, and hear what they have to say. Because as soon as you hear somebody say, this is how we do things here, that's an orthodoxy, and that's going to limit how you view this situation and where you look for opportunities. All right, our final lens is weak signals, which kind of ties back to Chris's trends and foresight work. These are the disruptors or discontinuities that threaten us.
Yep.
I like the term weak signals because a weak signal is like a foreshock in the seismograph on the bottom of the screen. It signals very quietly and subtly that something is coming. And if you take advantage of that knowledge early on, if you can identify that knowledge and spot it early on, there's potentially huge opportunity for you. But it's just because it is so hard to spot that the opportunity is so big, nobody else will be paying attention to it. If you don't hop on it early on, it can potentially become a huge threat to you, and that's when it becomes the discontinuity or the disruptor. So we've got to watch for them, we've got to be aware of them, got to take advantage of them when we can. But if weak signals combine, they can cause game-changing disruption. So.
And Julie,
one by themselves. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, yeah, and Julie, I'm thinking about what we talked to Chris about just a little bit ago. Having a process in place to understand the trends and the foresight. Right, these weak signals are out there. Right.
Oh, they are.
Our business will be different 5 years from now than it is today. Our customers will be buying differently 5 years from now than they are today. And if we wait until that weak signal becomes any stronger than it is now to start thinking about and looking at what types of models are going to be required, we're going to be caught behind the 8 ball and have a hard time thriving in that changed environment.
Sure, but you can even flip it, Dirk, and say, these weak signals are here now.
Yep.
Not how do I protect myself from it, how do I take advantage of it?
Well said.
How can I do something that nobody else is doing yet because they haven't quite figured out where the signals are or what they mean, or they're trying to ignore it?
There you go.
I love the Blockbuster analogy because Netflix actually went to Blockbuster and said, will you handle an online, sales model, and we can do it for you. And Blockbuster laughed them out of the room. But who's laughing now?
Right on.
Yeah, okay, so we've got our four lenses. We've broken out our thinking now across each of them. Now it's time to step into convergence. Let's bring them together. If you could hop to the next slide, thank you. Yeah. So we're going to crash all these insights and then look and see how they recombine in new, novel, and unforeseen ways. And let me give you an example of this. We were working with Whirlpool in and around 2000, and they were shifting from a brand awareness focus to an innovation focus. And so using our methodology, they were, training up teams of innovators. They called them I teams. And they had an I team, that looked at orthodoxies. And the orthodoxy I team said, well, women tend to drive purchases of home appliances.
Yep.
So, they're our market segment. And they thought about that a little bit more, and they said, well, gosh, there's a lot of guys out there too. What can we do for guys? What would men like that we can do? And so that was the idea that came out of the Orthodoxies I team. Customer Insight said, wow, all our appliances are kind of limited in the laundry room and kitchen. How can we move out in the house? And so they looked at surveys and research on how people use the different rooms in their houses. And what they found was the foyer was the least used room. Mm-hmm. Now, that seems kind of insignificant, but they said, why is that? And they dug a little deeper and found that, well, when mom and dad pull the car into the garage, everybody gets out and goes into the house through the garage. So their customer insight told them that, wow, people are using the garage a lot more than we realized. And finally, their core competency group, said, what are we good at? Well, we're good at appliances. We make appliances. We're really awesome at that. But then they dug deeper. And they said, well, what's an appliance? It's really kind of a motor and a lot of wires, and all that's pretty commoditized.
Yeah.
But, it's got sheet metal bent around it and kind of a wrapper. We're really good at bending sheet metal. Yeah, I guess that's our core competency. So when they crashed all of this together, all of a sudden, in this new context, they're saying, what can we do that men will like? Everybody's spending a lot more time in the garage, wow, and we're good at bending sheet metal.
Wow.
And that became the basis for the business line for the Gladiator garage storage. And that was one component of Whirlpool's resulting innovation that contributed to $8 billion in innovation-driven revenue. $8 billion for one business.
My goodness.
Is innovation hard? Yeah. Can it work? Oh, yeah. But you've got to start and take those first steps. Thanks, Dirk.
No, Julie, that is great stuff, and how you pulled it together with that example of Whirlpool, and how we can all take a look at our businesses with those different lenses. And you've given us a model of those 4 steps, right? We got to start with those customer insights and really drill down what are our core competencies, and it might not be the first thing that we would say that it is.
It's often not.
Yeah. We've got to be open to.
But don't forget, you got to practice.
Yeah. Thank you very much. You're reminding me, right? And then I think your point about orthodoxies.
Practice.
I think your point about orthodoxies is right on. And I think we in the distribution world have been guilty of too many biases. And, I think we've been incestuous in the industry. And it truly is time to start looking outside of the industry and tear down some of these biases for our future. So great stuff. I appreciate it. Hey guys, we're coming up. We have just a few minutes, so maybe 1 or 2 questions if you don't mind. Chris, you're thinking relative to trends and foresights. I guess one of the first questions I've got that would come to my mind is, as you guys look at it, as you think about the distribution market, do any trends, mega shifts, jump out at you that that if you were the owner of a distribution business, you would start paying attention to?
Yeah, good question. Obviously, that's one of the $1 million questions.
Right.
I mean, I think couple of points there. I can offer a little bit on some big trends that we're tracking, and also, something that sort of harkens back to what Julie was saying is, trends in isolation are interesting and can be useful, but again, when we start crashing them together and thinking of them in combination, how do they reinforce each other? What are some of the underlying drivers of trends?
Yep.
That's when you start to get a bigger perspective. But clearly, we want to also sort of say what are some of the big issues. One of the things that as futurists we always look at is demographic change.
Yep.
And so, whether I was, B2B, B2C, warehouse and distribution, or whatever industry, we've got to keep tabs on that stuff, because in the end, the demographics drive demand, they drive markets, they drive retail, they drive, our workforce, and all those sorts of things. So one of the interesting ones clearly is the sort of big shifts in terms of ethnic makeup in the U.S. It's not a big secret. You can look at census projections and see exactly where we're headed.
Yep.
And we're headed towards being a majority-minority country by 2042, right? So the white population will be less than 50% by 2042. So I know that feels a long way off,
yep.
But one thing that a lot of people miss in this trend is that it's going to hit the kids way, way earlier. 18 and under population in the U.S. is going to be majority minority by 2023.
Huh. Wow.
Okay, so
yep.
That's another one of those cases where the future is already here or nearly here. It's just not going to be evenly distributed across the whole country in time, or
you bet.
on that time frame. Another one of the big things that we hear a lot of people talking about, and that really gets traction with clients, is sort of the shift towards the post-PC world. When you're thinking about technology, the kind of technology you're going to be rolling out in your business, the kind of technology your customers are going to be using, the 30-year domination of the PCs and the laptops, that's over. Okay, 2011 was a clear tipping point when PC and laptop sales were less than smartphone sales.
Yep.
Okay, and tablets really exploded. So we're really moving towards a new era in computing where it's going to be all mobile, all pervasive. It's going to be wearable. We have Google Glass coming out, all that kind of stuff. So moving off the desktop into the world into new ways. So that's a real big shift. One final one that we really find resonates with, again, all kinds of clients is the real increasing diversity in the retail environment. Right. So one thing we really see is that retail is dispersing. It's moving out towards the consumer. So not just mom and pop and big box stores anymore, but we have pop-up stores and temporary shops. We have mobile commerce. We have food trucks. I was walking down the street here in DC the other day. There was a mobile clothing boutique in a truck.
Is that right?
Retail is moving out towards the consumers. We got a lot of innovation going on in vending, obviously, right now.
Yep. Everything
from consumer electronics to cupcakes. So interesting stuff happening in retail for sure. That definitely will be impacting warehousing and distribution.
Yeah, great stuff. A lot to think about, Chris, and I know that you've got more. Thank you. Hey, and then Julie, one real quick for you, if you don't mind. Again, we're coming up on the time, but one of the things you said early on was that our ongoing operations are typically at odds with innovation efforts. Can you just highlight that for me one more time?
Right.
Yeah, just what do you mean by that?
Yeah, sure. Well, if you look at how our businesses run, everything is tightly forecast, and you have very expected results that you hope to get. And if you fail to get those results, it's usually a problem with execution.
Yep.
But we don't have reliable data that we can use to predict how an innovation project or journey is going to proceed. They could have lots of early failures until they figure out what the right mix is. So there's not reliable data, and so we're basing a lot of our planning on speculation and uncertainty, and that's why we have to be willing to test so heavily. We've got to test all of these assumptions.
You bet.
Yeah, and move away from the minimize failure culture.
Yeah, agreed. Hey, Julie, thank you so much. Chris, thank you so much. We're up on our hour. I know we could spend a lot more time. You guys have helped crystallize so well some things that we need to be thinking about to take those first steps of innovation. I really appreciate it. And again, I just love what you guys are doing as that leader in terms of providing software-driven innovation solutions. You guys are just doing great things in addition to the trends and foresight that you consulting that you lead, Chris. We're just honored that you are a part of Unleash and helping us drive a new spirit of innovation throughout the organization.
Hey, Dirk.
Throughout the distribution industry. Yeah.
I just wanted to add that this doesn't have to be the end of the conversation. Chris and I are both going to be at UnleashWD in October, and we'd be happy to talk to any of the callers there if they have questions further.
Boy, I appreciate that, no doubt, and we are excited that you guys are going to be there. As you know, Julie and Chris, our second annual Innovation Summit for Distributors is October 29th and 30th here in Chicago. We've got a phenomenal 2 days. Both of you talked about the importance of looking outside of your four walls, outside of the industry. And this is the only industry conference with no industry speakers. Two of our keynoters are just unbelievable. The first you see on the left-hand side of your screen is just retired Admiral James Stavridis, who is the former NATO Supreme Allied Commander. And he's going to come in and talk about the innovation that he's driven through bureaucracies like the Navy and like NATO, and how he has helped his bureaucracy make the impossible possible. On the right is Jay Steinfeld, who is the founder of Blinds.com. Just a phenomenal story how he disrupted the industry, and he took a 1,000 square foot retail business and developed a $130 million e-commerce business, completely disrupting the industry and just doing great things through his innovation, through his humanistic leadership, and through his constant experimentation. Those are just two of 18 innovators that we're going to have and hear stories from and learn from and be inspired to drive change and innovation throughout our businesses. So, Chris, Julie, thank you again. We look forward to seeing you all at Unleash on October 29th and 30th. For those of you that want to learn more about Innovaro and Trends and Foresight, please check them out on the web at innovaro.com. That's it for today. Thank you all, and we look forward to seeing you at Unleash and out on the road. Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Julie.
Thank you, Dirk.